The taxi driver asked him which house.
That plot has been empty
Emeka
land for
looked at the
years.
address in his phone,
Are
the
you
one
sure about
Adiaze
this
had sent him
address?
twice, the one he had stared at so many times in the past 4 years that he had memorized it without intending to. He read it out. The driver frowned. "There is no house at that address," the driver said. "That land has been empty for years." Emeka sat in the back of the taxi with 4 years of savings and a bag of gifts for a woman he had not stopped believing in for a single day, and felt the specific cold that has nothing to do with weather. He had not told Adiaze he was coming. He had wanted to surprise her. He did not know that he was the one about to be surprised. Before we continue, dear friends, welcome to this channel. This is a place for stories that tell the full truth, the sacrifice and the betrayal, the breaking and the rebuilding. If you are watching for the first time, please subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss what comes next. Drop a comment below telling me where you are watching from tonight. I read every single one. Now let us go back to where this story began. Before the gifts, before the taxi driver, before everything that shattered. Let us begin with who Emeka was before he left. Emeka grew up in Unugu, the third of 4 children. His father had been a civil servant who retired early due to illness and left the family with little beyond a modest house, an old car that spent more time at the mechanic than on the road, and the specific dignity of a man who had never taken what was not his. His mother sold dried fish and pepper at the Ogbete market, waking at 4 in the morning and returning at 6 in the evening with tired feet and enough money to feed her children and keep them in school. Emeka had watched his parents work like this his entire childhood and had decided 2 things. First, that poverty was not a permanent condition. Second, that the only way out was honest labor applied in the right direction. He completed his OND in mechanical engineering and found work at a small manufacturing company in Unugu. The salary was modest, the ambition inside him was not. He saved carefully, applied for a work visa through a legitimate program, and 3 years later received the document that would change the direction of his life. He told Adiaze first. They had been together for 2 years by then. She was 24, he was 27. She worked as a primary school teacher in a school that paid irregularly and taught with the specific dedication of someone who believed children deserved better regardless of what the system provided. He told her what the opportunity meant and what it would require. Long distance, sacrifice, patience, years before they could be together properly. She did not hesitate. She said, "Go. I will wait. Build something and come back for me." He looked at her face in the evening light and made a decision that took less than 3 seconds. He believed her the way you believe someone who has never yet given you a reason not to. The thing about Adiaze was that she had been honest at personal cost before he ever left. There had been a night 2 months before his visa came through when one of his former classmates approached Emeka at a gathering and offered what seemed like a legitimate opportunity. A transport business, modest returns. The man seemed trustworthy. Emeka had been tempted. He told Adiaze that night. She listened to every detail. Then she said, "The numbers do not match what he is describing. If the returns were real, the investment would be 3 times higher. Something is wrong with this offer." He pushed back slightly. She held her position. "I am telling you what I see, not what you want to hear. That is what you asked me for." He did not invest. 6 months later, the man's business collapsed and several people who had put money in lost everything. He remembered that evening often while he was abroad. He remembered how she had told him the difficult truth without softening it. He held that memory as evidence of who she was. He did not know that honesty, like everything else, can erode under the right conditions. The country he arrived in was everything Nigeria was not in terms of infrastructure, and everything Nigeria was in terms of loneliness. The roads were smooth, the electricity never went out, the buses arrived on schedule, the tap water was drinkable, and he knew nobody. He found shared accommodation with 3 other Nigerian men in a small apartment near the industrial district, where most of the available work was concentrated. The room he occupied was barely large enough for a bed and a chair. The window looked onto a concrete wall. In winter, Frost gathered on the inside of the glass in the mornings, and he learned to sleep in 2 layers of clothing. His first job was in a food processing factory where he stood for 9 hours each shift on a cold floor, monitoring conveyor belts and managing machinery that broke down at inconvenient intervals. The pay was decent by Nigerian standards and almost nothing by the standards of the country he was living in. He calculated everything in naira. A pair of boots, 2,000 naira equivalent. A week's groceries, 4,000 naira. His monthly rent, 12,000 naira. Everything he spent felt like a decision against the future. He found a second job on weekends cleaning office buildings in the city center. He mopped corridors, emptied bins, scrubbed bathrooms, and carried heavy cleaning equipment up and down staircases until his shoulders ached with a pain that felt permanent. On a Sunday evening in the second year, he passed a restaurant and saw through the window a table of people eating a meal he could smell from outside. Roasted chicken, warm bread, something that reminded him of his Sunday afternoon in his mother's kitchen. He stood at that window for almost a full minute. Then he calculated what the meal would cost and divided it by the exchange rate and understood that it was 2 bags of cement at home. He kept walking. Later, he ate bread and an egg in his room and told himself that enjoyment was for later, and he believed it completely. He believed it for 4 years. But every month, without fail, on the 1st or the 2nd, he transferred a significant portion of his combined earnings to Ideaze. He kept only what was necessary for survival and sent the rest. He told himself this was investment. This was what love required when love was trying to build something real. The calls between them were the anchor of his life in those early years. He called every 2 or 3 days, and Ideaze always answered with the warm voice of someone who was glad to hear from him. She asked about his health, whether he was eating properly, whether the cold was manageable. She told him about her students, about her mother who had become unwell and recovered, about small neighborhood events and market prices and the ordinary texture of life at home. When he asked about the building project, she spoke with calm confidence. She said the plot had been cleared and was secured. She said the foundation work had begun. She said the block molder was reliable and materials were arriving in stages. She said prices had risen, but she was managing carefully. He trusted her completely. Not because he was naive, because he had spent 2 years watching this woman and he had seen nothing in her that suggested dishonesty. He had watched her tell him an uncomfortable truth about a business deal when it would have been easier to stay silent. He had seen her character tested, and it had held. He did not know that people can contain qualities that contradict each other, that a person can be honest in some things and dishonest in others, that character under pressure sometimes reveals a different face from character at rest. The first sign arrived in the second year, but he interpreted it incorrectly. Ideaze had been quieter than usual on a particular call, not unfriendly, simply distracted. He assumed she was tired from school. He assumed the slight difference in her voice was exhaustion rather than concealment. The second sign came 3 months later when his mother mentioned in passing that she had not seen Ideaze in some time. "She used to come and greet me," her mother said, "but I have not seen her in almost 4 months. Emeka frowned. "I will ask her." When he asked, Ideaze said she had been busy with schoolwork and a family matter that had taken her away for several weekends. He accepted and called his mother afterward and explained. Her mother said nothing, but something in her silence was not fully settled. The third sign was a video Ideaze sent. He watched it carefully that evening, more carefully than he had watched previous videos. The wall visible in the background looked slightly unfamiliar in a way he could not immediately explain. The angle was strange, showing only a partial view. The workers visible were moving but not clearly doing anything specific. He told himself he was overthinking. He sent back a voice note saying the progress looked good and that he was proud of how she was managing. She sent back a heart emoji. He began to plan his return in the third year. He spent weeks selecting gifts. For Ideaze, he bought perfume from a department store that he had walked past many times and never entered. He bought a quality handbag after comparing prices for 2 weeks in different shops. He bought fabric he had seen her admire in a photograph, a deep green Ankara print that he located at an African market in the city and paid more than he should have because he wanted to see her face when she opened it. He did not tell either of them he was coming. He wanted the surprise. He wanted to see them real faces, unguarded, unprepared, genuinely joyful. He had been imagining those faces for 4 years. The flight home felt like a prayer answered in real time. When the plane descended through clouds and he saw Nigerian land below him for the first time in years, something in his chest unlocked that he had not known was closed. He was home. He hired a taxi and gave the driver Adazi's address. He had not called ahead. He was smiling before the taxi had left the airport. The driver asked him, "Which house?" Emeka looked at the address in his phone and read it out. The driver frowned. "There's no house at that address. That land has been empty for years." Emeka asked the driver to take him there anyway. He needed to see for himself. The taxi arrived at a stretch of undeveloped land on the outskirts of the city. No foundation, no blocks, no partially completed structure, no sign that anything had ever been built or intended to be built. Just land, empty and quiet in the afternoon sun. He sat in the stopped taxi and looked at it for a long time. He remembered the driver's words from the morning. "There is no house at that address. That land has been empty for years." He had thought the driver was mistaken. He was now understanding that the driver was the only person in 4 years who had told him the truth without being asked. He called Adazi. She answered. "Emeka," he said, "I am in Enugu. I came to surprise you. I am at the building site. There is nothing here." A silence followed that was too long. "Emeka," she said. Her voice carried something that was not joy. "Where are you? Tell me where you are." Another silence. Then she said, "I will call you back," and the line ended. He called her back immediately. No answer. He called again. No answer. The third time, the phone was switched off. Emeka sat in the stopped taxi on an empty piece of land that was supposed to be his future and stared at his phone in the afternoon sun. He called his mother. "Mama, I am in Enugu. I came to surprise everyone, but I went to the building site and there is nothing there, and Adaze is not answering her phone." His mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Come home, my son. Come home first." The way she said it told him everything. His mother was sitting outside when the taxi arrived. She stood when she saw him and opened her arms, and they held each other for a long time without speaking. She cried quietly against her shoulder. He felt how small she had become in 4 years, how much time weighs on a body. Inside, she gave him food and water and sat across from him and watched him eat with the specific attention of a mother measuring her child's pain. When he finished, he asked her directly, "Mama, what do you know about Adaze?" She put down her cup. She told him everything she had held back to protect his focus while he was abroad. Adaze had stopped visiting more than a year ago. His uncle had heard through a distant neighbor that she had moved in with someone. His uncle had gone to check the supposed building address and found empty land. Emeka sat with this. "And the photographs?" he asked. "The videos she sent?" His mother shook her head slowly. "Did anyone ever see the building? Did anyone confirm it existed?" She looked at the table. "I asked her once. She said it was outside town. I sent my uncle. He said the address led to land that belonged to someone else." Emeka pressed both hands flat on the table. He breathed through his nose. "Mama, I sent money for 4 years, every month." She reached across and placed her hand over his. "Every calculation I made," he said. "Every shift I worked in the cold. Every weekend I cleaned office buildings instead of resting." He stopped. He could not continue the sentence because the full weight of it was too large to fit into words. His mother looked at him with the eyes of a woman who had been carrying knowledge she could not share and was now watching her child receive it. He asked her, directly, "Why didn't you tell me? I did not want to trouble your mind while you are suffering there. I hoped it was misunderstanding. I prayed it would resolve." He nodded slowly. "I need to see her," he said. His mother did not argue. She understood that some truths must be seen with the eyes, not only heard with the ears. He found Adaze through a cousin who still lived in the old neighborhood. The cousin gave him an address in a quieter part of the city, with the discomfort of someone who has been holding information they did not ask to hold. He hired a motorcycle and arrived at a modest compound. He knocked. Adaze opened the door. She looked well. That was the first thing he registered, and the thing that hurt in a way that he had not anticipated. She was wearing a comfortable dress. Her hair was neat. She looked like a woman who had been living an ordinary, comfortable life. She looked like someone who had not been waiting. For a moment, she simply stared at him. Then he stood in that doorway and tried to locate something solid to hold. He thought of the restaurant window in winter. He thought of 2 bags of cement. He thought of his mother's voice on the phone every Sunday. He thought of the gifts in the bag with careful labels and the green Ankara fabric he had searched 3 different markets for. He thought of the notebook where he had kept his savings records, the running total, month by month, year by year, the column where he tracked what had been transferred for the building. He thought of every Sunday afternoon he had walked cleaning office buildings instead of resting, so there would be more to send. Then a child toddled to the doorway, approximately 18 months old, and grabbed Adaze's leg and said, "Mama." He looked at the child, then at Adaze, then back at the child. He looked at his own hands, the same hands that had loaded factory belts for 4 years, the same hands that had scrubbed bathroom tiles in city offices until midnight, the same hands that had carefully folded gifts into tissue paper and labeled them with names. He looked at those hands, and then he looked at the child, and then he looked at Adaze, and he understood that there was no version of this moment that he could fix. He said quietly, "How long?" She said, "Emeka, please." "How long?" She looked at the floor. 2 years. 2 years. The child in her arms was 18 months old. 2 years of building a secret life while his money built the comfort it ran in. "The building," he said. She closed her eyes. "There is no house." "The land?" "I never bought any land." "The photographs?" "I took them near other people's building sites. The videos were edited." He nodded slowly. "All of it," he said. She began to cry. He heard a man's voice from inside the house asking what was happening. He heard Adaze trying to explain. He heard the child beginning to cry. He looked once more at the child, innocent, asking for nothing, understanding nothing of the weight being carried by the adults around him. He turned and walked away. She called his name. He did not stop. He wept at his mother's house. Not immediately. He held himself together through the motorcycle ride back and through the walk to the compound and through the first few minutes of sitting in his mother's room with his hands in his lap. Then she sat beside him and said nothing, and he collapsed. He wept the way men weep when they have been holding something for too long. His shoulders shook, his breath came in ragged intervals. His mother held him against her side and stroked his back and said nothing, which was exactly the right thing to say. When the worst of it passed, she brought him water. "You are not foolish," she said, when he was calm enough to hear her. "Do not call yourself foolish." "I sent everything home for 4 years," he said. "I know, my son. Every month. I never missed 1 month. I know, my son." He looked at her. How does a person do that to someone? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Some people look at love and see a person. Some people look at love and see a resource. You cannot always tell which kind you are dealing with until money meets character." He stared at the floor. "Your money met her character," your mother quietly said, "and her character showed itself. That is not your failure. That is simply what happened." He shook his head. "I should have seen it." "You saw what she showed you," she said, "and what she showed you was carefully chosen." He pressed his palm to his face. She continued, speaking slowly so each word could settle. "Your father never had much," she said, "but everything he had, he shared equally, even the small things, especially the small things." She looked at the floor briefly. "That is how I knew he was the right person, not because he was generous when generosity was easy, but because he was careful with what belonged to others." Emeka swallowed hard. "Adaze was not careful with what belonged to you," your mother said simply. "That is the full story. Everything else is detail." He sat nothing for a long time. Then he said, "What do I do now?" "Tonight," she said, "you sleep, you eat, you let your body remember it is home. Everything else is tomorrow's question." He slept in the room of his childhood, under the ceiling fan that had been turning slowly in that room since he was 12 years old, and for the first time in 4 years, he did not think about money or building plans or progress reports. He thought about nothing at all. And in that emptiness, something that had been tense for a very long time began, slowly, to rest. He stayed in Enugu for 3 weeks before returning abroad. During those weeks, he did what needed to be done. He spoke briefly to a lawyer about his options, though the money, transferred willingly through documented channels, was largely unrecoverable. He updated his mother's house using money he had kept separately as emergency savings. He spent time with his sister. He visited old friends. He ate his mother's cooking and let the familiar city settle around him. He did not contact Adaeze again. She had called twice through an unfamiliar number. He did not answer. Some doors, once closed, should remain closed. When he returned to the airport, his mother held him for a long time. She said, "You are still the man I raised. Remember that." He carried those words with him onto the plane. Rebuilding trust is slow work. Emeka did not rush it. He returned to the foreign city and continued his life with the quiet discipline of someone who has been wounded and is choosing recovery over bitterness. He worked. He saved more carefully. He invested in skills that expanded his professional options. He was promoted once, then again. He moved into a better apartment. He bought himself proper furniture for the first time and sat in it without guilt. He called his mother twice a week. He sent money regularly to ease her daily life and improve the family house. He contributed to his sister's education. He did the things love requires, and he did them for people who had never betrayed him. 3 years after his return to the foreign city, a Nigerian woman named Ifeoma joined the professional development program at his workplace. She was an engineer with a quiet confidence and a habit of asking questions that went 3 layers deeper than the surface of whatever was being discussed. She did not perform. She did not manage impressions. She simply showed up, did her work, and spoke honestly when she had something to say. Emeka noticed her, the way you notice something real in an environment that has taught you to look carefully before trusting. One evening, months into their friendship, Emeka arrived at the restaurant where they had agreed to meet and found Ifeoma already at the table, speaking quietly to a young Nigerian man who was clearly distressed about something. When she saw Emeka, she held up one finger. "One moment." She continued speaking to the young man. Emeka sat nearby and watched without listening. He saw her give the man her full attention. He saw her lean forward when he spoke and lean back when she responded, giving him room to think. He saw her ask questions that were practical rather than performative. After some time, the young man nodded and left. She came to the table. "Sorry for the wait." "Who was that?" "A new arrival at work. He was having difficulty with his accommodation paperwork and nobody had explained the process properly." "Did you know him before tonight?" "No. He looked lost at the entrance. I recognized the expression." Emeka looked at her. "You recognized the expression," he repeated. She shrugged.
everyone who arrives here alone has that expression for the first few weeks. I remember mine." Emeka said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "I had that expression for about 6 months." She smiled. "I know. You still have it sometimes when nobody is watching." He laughed, a real laugh, unplanned and unguarded. It was the laugh of a man remembering that goodness still existed in the world and was sitting across from him, ordering pepper soup. Their friendship built slowly and honestly over many more months. She did not treat his caution as a problem to solve. She treated it as information to respect. When he eventually told her the full story of Adaize, she listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "That cost you more than money." "Yes," he said. "And you stayed faithful the whole time." He nodded. She looked at him steadily. "Then the faithfulness belonged to you, not to her. She did not take it. She only failed to deserve it." Something in him that had been tense for 3 years released. He had heard something like this before, from his mother. He was beginning to understand that the people who told you the truth at personal cost were worth keeping close, and the people who told you only what was convenient, regardless of how convincingly they did it, were worth watching carefully. He had learned this lesson at significant price. He intended never to forget it. They married 18 months later in a ceremony that was joyful, in the specific way in which things are joyful when they have been earned rather than assumed. Their home, built on honesty and the specific love of two people who had both learned through difficulty what they were unwilling to settle for, became what Emeka had been sending money toward for 4 years without knowing it. Not cement and blocks, a life that held. They had children eventually, a boy first, then a girl. When Emeka held his son for the first time in the hospital and felt the specific weight of a new life against his chest, he thought of all the years that had come before this moment. He did not thank the betrayal, but he recognized that the road had led here and that here was good. His mother came to visit and held her grandchildren and cried the way she cried at his wedding, with gratitude that was too large for ordinary words. On quiet evenings after the children were in bed, Emeka sometimes sat with Ifeoma and thought about the road behind him. He had been deceived for 4 years by a woman he had loved genuinely. He had sent everything and received lies in return. He had stood at an empty piece of land and understood in one afternoon that the future he had been building did not exist. And yet, here was the table. Here was the woman across it who had noticed a lost young man at a restaurant entrance and stopped to help him because she remembered her own expression. Here were the children asleep in the next room. Here was the life that had replaced the one that was taken. One evening, his daughter climbed into his lap and asked him, "Daddy, were you always happy?" He smiled slowly before answering. "No," he said, "but happiness can come after hard times if you keep walking toward it." She seemed satisfied with this and fell asleep against his shoulder. He looked at Ifelma across the table. She was reading something, one leg tucked underneath her in the chair, unbothered and at peace. She looked up and caught him watching her. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Just looking." She shook her head slightly and returned to her book. He stayed where he was and let the ordinary evening settle around him like something he had earned. If you have stayed until the end of this story, dear friends, I want to say something directly to you. Emeka's story is not only about betrayal. It is about the specific courage of a person who gives their best in the dark, who works when nobody is watching, who sends money every month with clean hands and a faithful heart, who stands at a restaurant window in winter and calculates the cost in cement bags and keeps walking. That courage does not disappear when it is betrayed. It transfers. It becomes the foundation of what comes next, which is why what came next for Emeka stood on something real. If you are the Emeka in your own life right now, the one who has been faithful when faithfulness was hard, the one who has been building in the dark for someone who was not building with you, hear this. The faithfulness belonged to you. No one can take from you what was always in your own hands. And the chapter that deserves exactly the kind of person you have been through all of this is still ahead of you. Keep walking toward it. Drop a comment below. Tell me which part of this story stayed with you. Tell me where you are watching from tonight. Share this with one person who needs to hear it, the one who is still sending money home and still believing, the one who deserves to know that faithfulness has its own destination. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss a story on this channel. Before you go, click the video on your screen. Another story is waiting. Until next time, keep walking. Good night.